All right, I want to welcome anybody to the stream, or if you're catching up when it's not live. So this is going to be my first time dipping my toes into the water and doing live stream on YouTube. And if you notice, my microphone is not quality right now because I cannot find the cable for my microphone, and I had to order it, and it won't be here till Friday. So my voice is coming through the Mac laptop, and that might not be ideal. So what I'm going to do is turn off audio when I'm talking, and I'm going to try and explain everything to you with the audio off, and then I'll play the audio so you can hear it, and that way it doesn't sound so crazy. Anyways, let's get started. I don't want to waste your time. So if you clicked on this, you're probably trying to figure out, like, what is this fool talking about having a LFO tool for free in Logic Pro? Well, we do have an LFO tool in Logic Pro, and it's free. Obviously, it comes with the DAW. People just don't know that it's there because they don't call it an LFO tool. It actually starts as a different tool, but it is easily converted into an LFO tool. But first, before we actually jump into that LFO tool, I want to explain why I like to use this versus some of the other ways. And it's not always the preferred idea. There's the right tool for the right job, right? Is the saying. So anyways, let's stick with normal sidechain compression for just a second because I want to be able to show you the difference, okay? So let's hear, I'm going to sample the kick drum, let you hear the kick drum right now so your ears are familiar with it and you know what you're listening for. And it's just a punchy kick drum with a little bit of smack. It's not EQ'd like really high for the smacker. You can actually see I'm pushing the smack and the click down to try and bury the kick a little bit so it doesn't poke out as much. So most people are always trying to get their kick drum to pop out, right? But if you do things correctly, sometimes you actually got to kind of squash it down a little bit because it pokes out a little too much. So what I've got going on right here is we're going to take this bass right here, and this bass is going to be side chained through the FabFilter C2 compressor, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And I've got this compressor. It's set at an ideal. I mean, depending on the beat and the whatever swing you have and things like that, that's going to change the genre of music or whatever. That's always going to change your compression levels. But overall, these are the settings that are kind of are like your bass settings for 120 BPM, so that it's in rhythm with the BPM. So I'm not really going to get into whether this is the appropriate compression for this type of music that I'm trying to do or whatever. I'm just wanting to show you how much a compressor is able to duck the bass out of the way and what that looks like versus an LFO tool versus the LFO tool that I'm going to show you. So without further ado, let's get into this part right here. So here's the compressor, and like I said, I've got it set. It's in rhythm with 120 BPM, and it's compressing a ton. I mean, I'm squashing this down at 15 decibels right now, right, to try and get it out of the way of the kick. So let's hear it. We'll turn off the kick. So you can hear that pumping, right? And you can hear that it doesn't go away. There is an overall hum that kind of carries throughout the sound, and everything just kind of sounds, I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't sound as vibrant as it did before the compressor, because if you understand how a compressor works, it's going to bring some of the quieter sounds up, it's going to raise some harmonic levels, and it's going to suppress some harmonic levels. So it does color the tone of whatever instrument you're using when you run through a compressor. Even when you run through an EQ, you can color your sound. So if you're not trying to color your sound, that's one reason you don't want to use sidechain compression, right? Because it can color your sound just running things through a compressor. But also, if you listen, it doesn't really compress and get it out of the way fully. And what I want you to notice is right here, I've got the attack turned out at a 7.65 milliseconds, right? And if I bring it down to 0, which is where you usually kind of want it to get it out of the way fast, you end up with that clicking. Kind of a smacking pop. And I've also got the knee softened up, right? So if I bring the knee, and you start to hear that broken artifact, that little click, that little pop. Now, that's fine, you know, if you're making really loud music, punk, metal, and stuff like that, and you're not caring about the quality of your music and whether it's going to make it into people's headphones through the radio or Spotify or whatever. But if you're wanting a clean mix, those kind of clicks and pops right there can cause you real problems later on in the mastering stage when you're trying to get your stuff to sound professional. So that's one reason I don't like the compressor, not to mention the fact that it doesn't really get things out of the way. Now, for certain instruments, the compressor works fine. But if I have a bass that's got a lot of low frequencies that I need to get out of the way so that the kick drum and its low frequencies can come in and occupy that space, the sidechain compressor using a compressor doesn't duck it out of the way enough. And we can actually see that right here. Oops, why do I have that automation on? It's just dumb. Let me get rid of that automation there for some reason. So this is the bounce from the compressor. And I mean, you can see that when it starts to bring down these waves, it's not, right, because I had to slow down for the attack. So it's not a clean chop right at the sound, and it's not a full expansion. It's nice and packed with saturation, but it's not really expanding, letting the sound kind of explode up. And the curve coming up, I mean, all these kind of things could be slightly adjusted on the compressor, but not to the same extent you can with an LFO tool. So let's move on to the LFO tool and get into that part of things. So if we come down here and we bring up Steve Duda's LFO tool, and for those people who have never used the LFO tool, this is the LFO tool. This red area right here in the middle, it represents the sound waves, right, for the bass that it's compressing. And this blue line right here basically represents a human hand turning down the volume really fast, then holding it down, and then releasing the volume up a little bit slower than it originally turned it down. So this is just the volume being turned down every quarter note, right, to duck the bass out of the way of the kick drum. So let's hear the LFO tool in action. And you can hear how that's so much cleaner in the way that it compresses the sound and just moves it out of the way. There's just a clean gap right there. You know? And so the problem is this costs you money. It is a little more complicated to use to really get in and get things precise. It does take some time to learn to do, and it does tax your CPU. You're not going to be able to stack multiple LFO tools on top of each other without smashing your CPU. So let's move down to the next thing I have, which is the STFU, which is another LFO tool. This one is for free. For those who didn't know, you can look this up on the internet and get this LFO tool for free. It's essentially the same thing as the previous LFO tool that I was just showing you, made by Expert and Steve Duda. But this one right here, it's a little, it doesn't have as many options in some ways, and in other ways it does. So it's very similar, but it's different. It's a really good LFO tool. I highly recommend you have this in your arsenal. But again, this LFO tool is pretty hard on the CPU. But let's take a listen to what this one sounds like. Okay, so we get a nice clean duck. But do you hear the difference in the color? Okay, So because these are third-party plugins, and this is its own software with its own mathematical algorithms on how it's handling the audio files that are coming into it, it is going to alter the sound of those audio files and add color to it, exactly like maybe not as much as a compressor, but it still is going to color the tone of your sound. And it's going to tax your CPU. And for the third reason why these could be difficult to use, both these and the LFO tool, excuse me, I have the hiccups. These are a lot more difficult to automate. Now, a lot of people would say, why are you trying to automate an LFO tool? Well, if you stick around, I will show you, and it's magic. It's really cool. But let's get back to these tools, right? So let's listen to the STFU one more time, just by itself, without the kick. Okay, and now I want you to listen to this right here. Now, do you hear this? You hear the difference in these two? They're very similar. Okay. So let's look really quick. This one right here, this is the STFU. Let's look at the STFU bounce. Now you can see the STFU bounce compared to the compressor bounce that I showed you just a little while ago, and how much more of a return you get, and how much more of a ducking you get. Look at how this has just squashed your sound to zero, right? Both LFO tools squash the sound to zero, and then they bring that sound all the way back up, fully saturated. And then it clamps down real quick. There's still a little bit, right? That's this, when we look at the actual tool, you see this slant right here? That slant right there is this slant right here, okay? So, but you can see how clean that's getting out of the way of the bass, or the kick drum, for the bass and the kick drum. So that is what the STFU and the LFO tool bounce look like, okay? Now, this one, let's listen to it one more time. That is the STFU. This is my LFO tool made in Logic. And let's take a look at its audio bounce. Look at that. That looks very similar to what we were just looking at with the STFU and the LFO tool. In fact, I would argue this one is a little bit better, because not only do we get the same identical downslope, so we're not getting any change there, but the way it's coming back up, this actually follows the dissipation of the kick drum more accurately than the shape that either one of the LFO tools were given. And you can mess around with those shapes in the LFO tools, but I have found it's a lot easier to get this natural curve following your kick. So if we listen to this LFO tool with the kick, you can't tell me that it doesn't sound good, right? That sounds like a quality LFO getting your bass out of the way. So let's look at what I've got going. So here's my LFO, and here's the kick. I'm sorry, we were just playing the STFU, and that does sound good, because it was an LFO. Here's mine, and it sounds just as good. Actually, I think it sounds a little bit better. It sounds more glued together and cohesive, and still clear. So let's go down and take a peek. What is going on here? What have I done to create this this audio bounce that mimics an LFO tool? And what I have done is, you are looking at a tremolo tool, okay? So if I go in, and let's just turn off that tremolo tool. Let's grab a brand new one, and I'll show you. You can even pull it into stereo mode, okay? It doesn't matter if you pull it into stereo or into dual mono, okay? When you pull it up, I'll just start with showing you the default stereo mode. When you pull it up, this is what you're going to see in stereo. And you'll notice right here in the corner it says 180 phase. And that means that both the right and the left speaker are completely opposite of each other. So they are 180 degree phase from each other, completely facing in opposite directions. And so this is what a tremolo does. It's going to swing my audio in whatever rate I've got set, right? So I've got it at 1/8 and you can hear it swinging back and forth. And that's not good for a bass. And we can change that. And there are moments in music where this might be appropriate, but overall, that is not what any of us are looking for with our bass. We want our bass to be right down the middle in mono. And so what you're going to do is you're going to come down here and you're going to grab this little blue dot and you're going to drag it to the right until it lines up with this right here, and you're going to see this turn to 0 phase. Now, both right and left speakers are in line with each other, going up and down. And so now we have converted this. This is no longer a tremolo. And if you think of it as a tremolo, then you're on the short bus. You need a helmet you haven't kept up. This is not a tremolo, okay? This is now an LFO tool. Make no mistake about it. This is an LFO tool, and the reason for that is, listen. It is now simply, just like an LFO tool, this is the shape of a hand turning the volume up and down. Now, if we want to create an LFO that is similar to what we were hearing with the LFO tools, because if we bounce this right now, and I do have my sound squashed with an 18 with a -10, so let's turn that off so we can get a decent sized wave. Let's bounce it so we can actually see. And then you see when you bounce this, right? We're creating a gap for the kick drum, but it's actually the gap is occurring way too early, and it's coming back and returning right about the time it should be kicking in. So this is not going to get out of the way of the kick drum as it sits at the moment. Okay, but if we make some adjustments to these waves, okay, then we are going to end up with a shape that mimics the LFO tool. And how we're going to do that is these, if you think about this right here, is basically when the kick drum is going to be hitting. And there's a kick drum hitting right here. So this is the volume, and that's why it was being turned down before it got there, right? So I'm going to bring this further. And if I grab this green dot right here, and I move it left, I shift the entire set of waves. Now you can see that what I'm doing is I'm creating that down that you see at the beginning of the LFO tool, and now here's the return. The problem is this return is real soft compared to how we want it to return quicker. So what is going to control the length of your compression with this LFO tool is this right here and how far you set it. Okay, and so what I'm looking for in a symmetry is I like to be right around 91, 92 up here. That's the symmetry, and I feel like that's a pretty good spot to keep you getting out of the way just in time for the kick. And then this is how you're going to shape your wave, how fast it returns. Right? And I have found that right here around 40, this gives me a very, very similar duck as the LFO tool or the STFU, and I can bounce it right now to show you exactly what you get. So here we go. Here's the bounce, and look at that. And I mean, I've got my volume on that was shut off so that we could get maximum wave so you can see it visually here. But you can see we have gone down and we have a complete shutdown. Now, I have this set with that LFO tool at the moment, if we come in here and we look at the LFO tool, you can see how much little, right? That's what's creating that moment of silence, of mute. If I want to increase that so that the kick has more time to set in, I just simply move that over. And now I will go ahead and I will bounce this again so that you can see just how much just that little tiny adjustment right there changes. And now look at that space of silence where it's ducked down compared to here. You see that? See how that has shifted everything? And so this is what I highly recommend when you decide to use an Logic's tremolo tool as your LFO tool. All you need to do is when you are playing with these numbers, and usually your symmetry is going to be somewhere in this low 90s, right? So you can kind of use that as a guide rule. And then I like to keep my smoothing somewhere. I mean, this is completely preferable. This has to do with the kick. So depending on your kick, this is going to be completely preferential. You might want a really quick return of like 16 or 8 or 20 if you've got a real short kick. If you have a really long kick that tapers off slowly, you're going to want to pull this out so that your sound from your bass returns a little slower, okay? And so that is how you're going to shape. For the kicks that I like, I usually like a pretty punchy type thud type kick. I'm not really into the knocking or the clicking type ones, but I do like them with a good thump, but I also like them to get out of the way. I am really into a short kick. I'm not into the big 808 long drawn out type of kicks. Those work really well for hip hop, but they are horrible if you want to get a lot of other sounds going because that's just too much frequency in the way. So right here, this is a great setting for just a standard setting to start with, a bass setting. You know, low 90s, you're smoothing in your 40, and that's going to give you a good place to start with. Now, really quick, I want to show you if you go in and you decide you want to go with a dual mono, which it's just easier to do things when you're working with basses anyways, to just keep this all in dual mono, right? So if you're going to do a mono, you don't have to worry about adjusting the phase. It's just automatically, there is no phase because it's mono. So this allows you to just focus. You can go straight into just playing with your waves. Nothing changed. The numbers are still the same. All the tools still work the same. Okay, so it's really just about it just simplifies it. You don't have to worry about the phasing and the two images overlapping. This is just as clean as you're going to get. Now, why would a person want to use this versus using a plugin, STFU? This is completely free. So why would you not just use the STFU? Why mess with the tremolo and do this? Well, for multiple reasons. One, this does not tax your CPU at all. It it hardly hits your CPU. This is so much easier on your CPU because it's made by Apple with their product, and it doesn't tax the CPU because there's not a bunch of fancy stuff going on. And then to top it off, because it's their own equipment, it doesn't color, right? It might a tiny bit, but the amount of color that this adds to your sound versus the third-party products. I need to take a drink of soda first so I can talk again. My brain ran out of sugar. Somebody call 911. It fucking hurts to be this dumb. Okay. You just don't get as much change in the color of your tone. And then, what I also really like about using this versus the LFO tool or the STFU tool is the ease and the fun of automation with this. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, dude, are you 12 years old? Have you checked the oxygen level in your room? Because nobody uses automation on an LFO tool. You simply set your LFO tool to duck the bass out of the way, and once you've got it there, you don't touch it. So why would you even think of automating an LFO tool? And that's because an LFO tool can be used for something other than just ducking the bass out of the way of your kick drum. So let's go and listen to my bass with the LFO tool. And let's take this LFO tool and let's turn it off. So now you're hearing just the bass tone. And when I built this bass, I did it in Serum. I created it with two sine waves. One is an octave lower than the other one, so that you get a full range. I've got a band filter on here just so it's keeping us focused in the bass tones. I added some distortion, compression, and EQ because I really wanted the people who are listening to this on cell phones and laptops and things like that to be able to hear it. I didn't want it to have like some sub sound that you couldn't hear, but normally this would be geared towards your more subby type basses when I'm using an LFO tool for ducking. But I highly recommend using headphones when listening to this, though, just because that's going to give you the best idea of what's really going on with the frequencies. So anyways, we've got just a nice clean bass. Okay, so let's grab a brand new tremolo. And you know what, I'm not even going to play with it in stereo. Let's just go to it in dual mono so I can show you. It's simple, easy peasy. Now, we can play the sound with this tremolo added in dual mono. And you've just got a wavy LFO tool like I showed you. But watch what happens as I start to play with the rate, the depth, and the smoothing. Okay, this is going to be this. We are now moving into the bonus zone of the live stream tutorial here, folks. This is where I'm going to show you some really cool distortion. And the reason this distortion is so cool is not only does it sound cool, and it really does, is everybody loves the sound of a purring cat, right? We're not into the white snow of a TV cranked at 100 decibels, but if you can turn your cat's purr up to 100 decibels, you're probably going to get goosebumps and want to curl up and snuggle up with it because it's just such a comfortable sound. And I have been chasing that type of distortion. And if you understand distortion, distortion is just harmonics. And so when you can attach a different type of distortion to an instrument, that instrument is going to have different frequencies that are embellished. And those frequencies are going to cut through the mix because they're not the same as the other competing distortion frequencies, if that makes sense, right? So let's say you've got a couple of instruments playing a certain type of distortion, but you've got a lead instrument or a lead bass that you really want to kind of cut through the mix, but it's getting drowned out. This is the kind of distortion that will help it cut through the mix without being harsh. And everybody has had those moments where you're trying to you've got an awesome sounding bass, right? You're like, I love the bass. I love this bass. But once my drums and my guitars or my synths and all this other stuff kicks in, my vocals, like all of a sudden you really can't hear the bass. It kind of gets lost in the mix, and that's where people try to add distortion, right? They try and add a compressor, and then you end up changing the actual tonality or the color of your bass. People try and play with their EQ and try and, raise frequencies and boost frequencies in areas that they think is going to translate that sound when their mix is starting to get really loaded with a lot of frequencies. And I just think that it's not always going to be the solution, but I think this is a really, really good solution for people who are trying to get their instruments to cut through the mix. And so I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to play with these three settings. And I just want you to listen, and I'm going to create several different types of distortion. And yeah, just go ahead and take a listen to what you hear here. So let's do this. Okay, now if you're listening and you're watching that, then you're realizing like, wow, there are some really subtle, cool differences in all these textures of that distortion. And so this allows you to really kind of add the edge, the bite, the type of growl that you need for an instrument like a bass to kind of fight through the mix and grab that attention of the ear. And you can dial it up to the way you need it, and it's so subtle. I mean, if you're running it clean, right? I mean, if we just go to clean right here, and I love myself the 1/32 rate. I think it just gives it it's just a nasty distortion. I really dig it. But listen how right now there's not going to be any distortion, and then I'm just going to slowly bring up a little distortion into this thing, and just listen how you start to hear, especially when it starts to get around 48. On the depth, you'll really start to hear the tone of the bass doesn't really change a lot, but it starts to get just this little edge. It's really cool. It's good at cutting through a mix without being obnoxious and screaming like I'm trying to be heard, So here, let's take a peek at this. I mean, you can already hear it right there. Starting to affect it, but it's really right here in this area is where you really start to get kind of that purring growl going, and everything beyond this just magnifies it. You almost end up like a jackhammer. So, okay, let's go back. Let's bring this thing so that it's not distorted out too much. Let's just set it at a 48, and we'll keep the smoothing at 100%. So this is what it sounds like. In fact, let's pull the distortion back. So this is how we want. Let's just pretend this is how we want our bass to sound when the song is kind of quiet, right? And we don't have a lot going on. We're like, this is the type of, that's the distortion, that's the tension, whatever. Whether that's right or not at the moment is irrelevant. Just assume that it is, right? And then you're like, okay, now it sounds awesome, but then once the drop hits, my bass, I just can barely hear it. It's not enough distortion. Well, that's where, if you remember, I told you the automation for the LFO tool is really complicated. And the automation for the STFU tool is extremely complicated. But the automation for the tremolo tool in Logic is easy peasy. You cannot find an easier tool to work with when it comes to automation. So let's actually, I don't want to automate by volume, so let me pull that automation off. Let's go into our automation file, and we'll come down to this last tremolo because that's the last one. That's the one that's actually active. And let's just let's play with let's play the depth. So let's say from 1 to 2, my first bar is where the song is kind of quieter, and you can hear the bass really good. But then after the second bar, the song builds more and more instruments, and let's say by the fourth bar, we're hitting the drop, right? And that's where your bass has been really hard to hear. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's just exaggerate it for learning purposes. And oops, let me go the wrong tool, that bit. And let me add, I want it to kind of come up at the end. So, and then let's say like in the middle, just for fun, let's say we kind of make the bass do something really extremely weird just so we can hear. Okay, so now let's listen. That automation took a second. That's just off of the depth control for the tremolo, for the tremolo converted into an LFO tool, turned into a distortion tool, LOL. So you can see how easy that was to automate and create this nice movement with this very stagnant bass. That's just literally one note on a bass, right? But it's got this cool movement. And you can kind of play with this type of stuff right here. We're kind of surges and changes the tone. You can really play with that with certain transitional points and movements in your music with the groove and things like that, because it can really help make your groove move even more, right? And if you can get your groove to move, that's when the booties are bouncing, that's when the twerking is happening, that's when you are going to have people throwing money at you to be part of your music and want to have more music from you. Right? When you can get their booties shaken. Our brains are literally in our asses. I'm convinced of it. Every time people's asses are shaking, they have smiles on their faces. When they're sitting on their asses bored, they've got a frown. So somehow we're connected. They say our spine goes all the way down to our coccyx, so that's physical proof. I want to do something right here that I'm pretty sure a lot of people aren't expecting. But let's just listen to this bass right here. Okay, so let's grab a secondary tremolo tool, because like I told you, you can stack these. They're not hard hitting on your CPU. You could never do this with the normal LFO tools. So we have another tremolo, and we'll play the two of these. Now, obviously, you can set one up, right? I could set this one up. This is what we had set before as an LFO tool. So we'll have this one on. This is our LFO tool with the distortion. And now I'm going to turn on this third tremolo. I'm going to turn on a third tremolo, and I'm going to use this third tremolo to further play with distortion. Without and with. So there you go. You can stack these. You can play with this rate. You can play with the smoothing. You can play with the depth on two different tremolos. You can automate them so that each one is handling a different thing. Like maybe you want one specifically to handle your depth, right, to get the growl you want, but you don't want to play with the rate on it because you've got it dialed. And then you can use a second one to kind of play with the rate and or the smoothing, whatever. You kind of work them countering each other, and by doing that, by literally one of them being rough and one of them being smooth, right? And then as you're crossing, you're making the rough one smoother and you're making the smoother one rougher. There's some weird, I don't know if it's phasing or what, but there's some interesting harmonics that can be made in those transitions where the two tremolos are creating different distortion levels and kind of crossing each other's paths. And as Bob Ross, the great painter with the afro who smoked weed and loved life, would always say, happy fucking mistakes. And that's kind of what happens sometimes when you get to play with those tremolos crisscrossing each other and you stack them. All right. So I have shown you how to take a tremolo built into Logic and convert it into an LFO tool. I have showed you how to take that LFO tool made from a tremolo and use it to create distortion, and I have showed you how you can layer them and automate them. Okay, so that right there should make it so the next song you're making, if you have a stagnant, it doesn't have to be just with a bass. You could do that with a pad. You could do it with a guitar. You can do it with any sound you want to mess with and create texture and change to the sound, right? But now, let me show you how that really plays out. Let's go up here where we've got a kick drum, and we've got our bass. And I've kind of over distorted things. I'm going to pull off some of these tremolo, or this one, yeah. I just want a little more, because I don't want you to focus on the bass. I'm going to leave that like that for now. And now let's introduce some hi-hats. And I'm going to turn this down just a little bit. I'm pretty sure these were pretty loud last time I had sampled them. Okay, so now I'm going to bring in some hi-hats. And just listen to this. And if we go down, we can get rid of this distortion so it doesn't interfere so much. Okay, so that sounds like a typical EDM, like somebody starting an EDM song, right? You've got your kick on the quarter notes, you've got your hi-hats coming in there, and then you've got just your bass holding the sustain note, and it's pumping. So typical EDM. Okay, so let's take the hi-hats and have some fun with the LFO tool idea on the hi-hats. So I have a tremolo here that I've placed on the hi-hats. I've got my offset at 0. I've got my symmetry at 50. I've got my phase at 0. I've taken my smoothing down to 60. I've got my depth at 69, and I'm running 1/8 dotted notes. Now let's look here. Let's just listen to the hi-hats by themselves without the tremolo. Okay. Now let's introduce the tremolo. Right, and that feels more human. You know? Now I've taken a second tremolo, and I've got it at 50 with 0 offsets. I'm running it at 71 depth with 34% smoothing, and I'm running it at quarter notes. And that's going to counter, right? And it's going to be so random because this is a dotted eighths, and the other one is at quarter. There's times where they're going to be fully in sync and times where they're going to be syncopated from each other. And so this is going to add a real groove to the hi-hats. Are you ready for the magic? Check this out. You got this cool little groove, right? And if you add a delay to it, now you've got a little something going on with the hi-hats. Right? There's like a little groove versus this was what we had. This is what we started with. Kick on the tremolos on the hi-hats. I mean, you can always drop. I'm gonna do this just so we can hear the hi-hats really well. Versus right? Listen to the difference. This is just the one. And then you go with this one. Remember, these are automatable. Really simply, you can automate these. So we'll just go to the first tremolo and let's do, let's play with the depth, right? We'll just set the depth here. We'll set the depth here. Make sure that it reaches full height with at least half a bar to go. And let's just push this up and we'll pull this down. So it starts with right? So this is giving it this nice movement throughout this bar with these hi-hats. And I think it's kind of effective too if we maybe bring this to here. And then raise this a little quicker. Actually, I don't want that going here so fast. I want it to be back here. So we get this really cool movement. Right, we can add a third one. And if you use this one as an actual tremolo, which is what I've got going on right now, now you really got movement going on with the hi-hats, right? What if we move this up to eighths? Now it's moving so quick it's having a hard time, but if we keep going, depth out of this just a hair. That really fast. I mean, look at this. I got 3 of these with an OTT stack. It doesn't even affect their CPU at all. So, and like I said, these are easily automated, so we can go beyond just the depth. Let's go through real quick. I'm about ready to wrap up the stream here. I probably talk way too much, but let's play with the smoothing. We'll start out with it. It's probably it's about halfway on the smoothing, so we'll go ahead and right about the same time it gets nasty, we will make it rougher. See how that it's flowing. You can have like a big crash at the end of that, you know what I mean? Right? It sets it up for that stuttering. It's building the tension where it's flowing right now from this smoothed out. Right, and here it gets choppy. That's building the tension. Right? Anyways, that's I can play with these tremolo tools and using them as LFO and tremolo with hi-hats and just layer different hi-hats, and yeah, you can have so much incredible any percussion, any percussive sounds, rim shots with snare drums, rattles. It is really been pretty good. And here's another thing. As I was showing you the distortion, how you can create the distortion with the tremolos on the bass, that works really, 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 and I mean really fucking good on vocals, folks. Like, everybody's always trying to get their vocals to cut through the mix, and they grab the traditional, you know, saturators and all these things, and I'm telling you, you can add a lot of life, characteristic, texture, and fun to the vocals because you can't automate this so easy. You can really do some cool stuff with vocals and add that growl in somebody's voice, just that edge, and it can almost sound so incredibly natural. Nobody has a clue that you use a tremolo tool to do it, right? And so on this channel, for anybody who watched, first of all, I just want to thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I am sorry that my audio is horrible. Like I said at the beginning, I cannot find the cord for my microphone. I have ordered a new one. It will not be here till Friday. So this is the only audio. I really have. It's the only way that I can do this. And I've waited so long, and I just wanted to share some stuff with people. But yeah, the whole point of my channel is multiple reasons I'm going to do this is, one, I am an artist who's an old man. I'm in my 50s. I've been doing art for a long time, and I'm an extremely creative person who tends to kind of come through things a different way, which I'm sure you're already seeing by just how I've used the tremolo tool. And I've kind of approached Logic from day one, from this type of an angle. So there's a lot of little tricks that I have kind of learned through backwards engineering. And I don't come up with these things like, I'm not an uneducated person who's just sitting around like, oh, what happens if I play with tremolo? Like the whole thing with the tremolo, that came to me when I was listening to, I think it might have been Ahi on YouTube, who was talking about a growl bass. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but something he said made me realize, like, well, if you could shape an LFO tool onto a bass at the right levels, you could create that same growl, but with a lot less work. And I think it'd probably be a cooler sounding growl. And so that's kind of when I started to play with that tremolo tool that way. But anyways, my point is, I try and learn from really intelligent people. I spend a lot of time listening to guys like Warren Hewart. I like to listen to, Dead Mouse or Rez or Steve Duda. Anybody who has found success in sound engineering and mixing and mastering, and understands the tricks, and they've been able to do it successful, then I want to learn from them. But I've never been into copying people. I just want to understand how they did what they did, so that I can then change what they did and find logical places to make those changes, not just changing shit for the sake of changing shit. I don't ask why just to ask why, but I will ask why if I think I might have a different angle or a better solution to something. So as I continue to make these videos for YouTube, my goal is to help people achieve some of the mixing goals they have. I think I'm going to be able to explain to people some stuff when it comes to bass and kick drum relationship that's going to be helpful. I think I've got some information concerning how to create your mixes so that they are wide in a way that doesn't really cut in and create issues with your mixing and mastering down the road with phasing and things like that. There's just a lot of different things where I've kind of approached things from a different angle, and I've just had a lot of good people give me good information. So I'm by no means a master. I'm not a mathematician. There's a billion people on this planet. Well, how is there 8 billion people on this planet? So there's probably at least 7 billion people that are smarter than me. And yeah, but I'm creative, and I do have common sense, and so I'm able to come up with stuff that I hope I can help people. And so in the future, I'm going to do everything I can to put out videos that show you what I've learned and try and help you understand how to do those things if you like what I do. And for those who have not listened or haven't had the opportunity to listen to my music, so you can understand, do I have an idea of what I'm talking about, or is this guy just some idiot? You can judge for yourself. I'll let you hear the music, and then you can tell me it doesn't sound right. And if so, then if it sounds right, then you can learn how I'm doing it. And if you think this sounds horrible, then you can tell me to kick rocks. Sorry that took a second to bring it up because I'm kind of new at this. But anyways, here's my latest song, Ritual. Thank you for watching. Please give us subscription. I can really use it. I'm new to this, and the thumbs up would be just freaking awesome. Share it to anybody that you think might benefit from the information on this. Leave a comment if you have any questions, or if you have anything that you would like to have me address in the future, and I will respond to those. And anyways, thank you. Have a wonderful day. And here's my newest song, Ritual. You can judge whether I know how to make music or not. Peace out.